When buying a home, your down payment is going to be your biggest expense that you need to save for, but it's not the only one. There are some other costs that you need to be made aware of because you don't want to be finding out about them for the first time the week before you close on your new home. This needs to be taken into account when planning for your future purchase. So let's get right into it. First of all, what exactly are closing costs? Closing costs are essentially all the other costs on top of your mortgage and your down payment. Typically, the biggest one you're going to have to worry about is your property transfer tax or land transfer tax, depending on which province you're in. A quick note here is that this isn't applicable in all provinces. For example, there is no property transfer tax in Alberta. However, in Toronto, there are actually two separate land transfer taxes, one that's provincial and one that's municipal. So that can be a pretty substantial number. And while the majority of the closing costs are pretty much the same across each province, I'm just going to be focusing on BC for now. So property transfer tax is a one-time fee that is calculated based on the purchase price of the property and different from property taxes, which are paid on an annual basis. The way it's calculated is 1% on the first $200,000 of the purchase price, 2% on the portion between $200,000 and $2 million, and if you're over $2 million, then it's 3% on that portion, and even a further 2% on residential property over $3 million. So essentially, if you are in this higher price point, there will be a further 2% tax applied on the amount that is over the $3 million. And here's a quick little calculation trick you can use to calculate the property transfer tax if your purchase price is under $2 million. So what you're going to want to do is just take 2% of the total purchase price and then subtract $2,000. For instance, on a $1 million purchase, we would take 2% of the million, which is $20,000, and then subtract $2,000 from it, which would end up at $18,000. Now, there's actually some exemptions that you need to be made aware of. So if you're a first-time home buyer and your purchase price is under $500,000, then you're currently exempt from paying property transfer tax. And if your purchase price is between $500,000 and $525,000, you'll get a partial exemption. Additionally, if you're purchasing a pre-sale or new build and the purchase price is under $750,000, you're also going to get an exemption. And if it's under $800,000 but over $750,000, again, it's going to be a partial exemption. However, the good part about new construction is that you don't have to be a first-time home buyer in order to get this exemption. One thing to note here though is that the property does need to be used as your primary residence, and this holds true for both situations. Now, if you live in Greater Vancouver, you know that this doesn't help very many people due to the fact that even in my marketplace of Surrey and Langley, $500,000 is only really going to get you a nice one-bed condo, maybe a one-bed and a den if you're lucky. So it doesn't help very many first-time buyers whatsoever, and it's something we've been requesting to be changed for years. And the good news for you is that this is actually changing, or may have already changed depending on when you're watching this video. As of April 1st, 2024, the purchase price requirements for this exemption are going up to $835,000 for resale properties, with a partial exemption up to $860,000. And as for pre-construction and new builds, it's going up to $1.1 million with a partial exemption of up to $1.15 million. Next, you're going to want to hire a lawyer or notary to take care of the conveyancing. And in general, this cost is going to be around $1,500, give or take a little. Now, personally, I always advise my clients to hire a lawyer over a notary, even if it is slightly more expensive, which most of the time, honestly, it typically isn't. Now, the reason being is that if for some reason, God forbid, something goes south during a transaction, a lawyer can actually represent you, whereas a notary cannot. Now, luckily, throughout my career, I've never had this happen to any of my clients. However, I have heard of some very rare horror stories from others, and it's just not worth it in my opinion. But at the end of the day, it's up to you. Now, while you're going through the purchase process, you're likely going to want to get a home inspection. So typically, this is going to run you anywhere from between $300 to $1,000 depending on the type and size of the property. Obviously, a small condo being on the lower end and a massive home on acreage being on the higher end, but this is a decent ballpark to account for. Next is going to be the cost of an appraisal. In some cases, and don't quote me here, the mortgage broker or lender will end up paying for the appraisal, but sometimes you may be required to pay for it yourself. And in general, this cost can be between $300 to $500. So once again, please just take this into account just in case. Moving on to our next cost, that's going to be your movers. So movers can get extremely expensive, again, depending on where you're moving from and where you're going to, as well as how much stuff you have. Many people opt for just renting a U-Haul truck and getting some friends and family to help them out, and this can definitely save you some costs. But just keep in mind, it's also probably going to be a major headache. I absolutely hate moving myself, but it just depends if you want to spend the money or not. Additionally, if you're moving into a condo building, there is generally a move-in cost of around $200. The next cost is going to be your adjustments. So essentially on all properties, this is going to be your portion of the property taxes for the year. And if it's a strata property, your portion of the strata fees for that month. So these numbers can vary drastically depending on if you're moving at the beginning or the end of the year. So just take a look at what those numbers are to give yourself an idea of what it's going to cost for the given property. But luckily for you, your lawyer is actually going to do all these calculations on what's called the statement of adjustments when you go to visit them. And they'll provide you with a copy prior to coming in, so there's no surprises. And moving on to our last cost, it's the GST or goods and services tax. Now, GST is actually only applicable on pre-sales or new construction, as well as substantially renovated homes, which is defined essentially as 90% or more of the home being renovated. So it would pretty much need to be taken down to the studs or nearly completely replaced. This means that if you're buying a resale property, you don't have to worry about this. But if it's a new build or pre-construction home, then you're going to have to tack on 5% of that purchase price. And that can be a substantial amount, so just keep this in mind. However, the GST can actually be lumped into your mortgage, so I guess it's not exactly a closing cost per se, and you don't need the cash up front. But it's obviously still important to be made aware of. So as a general rule of thumb, the general recommendation is to save at least 1.5% of your desired purchase price for closing costs. Now, if that's something you'd like to discuss in more detail based on your unique situation, or if you're considering buying in the near future, you can scroll down and click the first link in the description to book a call with me at a time that works best for you. Now that you've got a better idea around the closing cost requirements, you're also going to need to know how to pick a realtor. And the good news for you is that I covered exactly this in another video, which you can find right here, that covers the 7 questions you need to ask your realtor before you pick them. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.